Welcome to Dark Futures. Today's topic is George Orwell's famous novel 1984. It's a detailed and complex book open to interpretation. This has spawned many fan theories, and we're going to take a brief look at 10 of them. I want to point out that I haven't come up with any of these theories myself. I just stumbled upon them here and there throughout the years. Now, on to the theories. Okay, so the first theory is very common and generally agreed upon. The theory is that Ingsoc eventually falls. The evidence for this is that the Newspeak appendix is written in past tense. It's not about what's happening in the present, but what happened in the past. In other words, the novel supposedly ends on a positive note. The next theory is also common and suggested by Julia in the novel. The theory is that there is no war against Eurasia and East Asia. It's simply propaganda fabrication by Ingsoc. What I think speaks for this theory is that a regime can use the war propaganda to control the population without having to take the risk of losing a war. One objection against this theory could be that the propaganda with three enemies constantly switching sides is overly complicated. Another common theory is that Oceania is not a mighty superstate. It's just the United Kingdom. The rest of the world is non-totalitarian, and Oceania is totally isolated. As the country is hermetically sealed, it's easy to maintain the illusion. I think this makes much sense. It's obviously easier for government to control a small country, and they can still instill a sense of might in the population with the superstate propaganda fabrication. A less common and somewhat complex theory is that Ingsoc doesn't really have an ideology. Whatever manifestos there have been are ignored, and the inner party does whatever it sees fit. It's all about oppressing the population and thus maintaining the tyranny. This is a logical theory in my opinion. The inner party seems to be a collective of omnipotent sadists that only value power. But then again, can't an ideology be outlined in the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism? Or can the book just be boiled down to a single sentence? Power for the sake of power. An interesting theory is that Syme doesn't get executed. Instead, he gets promoted to inner party member. The fake vaporization is simply instigated to give him a clean slate. I think this theory makes sense, but it's not clear-cut. On the one hand, Winston Smith points out that Ingsoc doesn't like overly intelligent party members. On the other hand, Syme is obviously loyal, an orthodox party member, and would surely be an asset to the inner party. Maybe he was promoted, maybe he was executed. Now it's time for a spoiler alert. If you haven't read the novel Julia by Sandra Newman, you might want to skip the next theory, because what I'm about to discuss plays a prominent role in that novel. I'll give you a couple of seconds to skip forward. So, the theory is that Julia is a thought police agent. In other words, she approaches Winston Smith to lure him into a honey trap, and she may very well have done it before. She may or may not fall in love with him. As for her arrest, it's just thought police theater, and she's just taken to the Minister of Love for debriefing. What I think speaks for this theory is that if she wasn't a thought police agent, she wouldn't have taken the risk of approaching another Ingsoc member, especially a complete stranger. A speculative theory is that O'Brien was a member of the Brotherhood. When he was arrested, he was brainwashed into serving the inner party. On the one hand, it would explain why he's so good at detecting and understanding thought criminals, but on the other hand, would Ingsoc really let a member of the Brotherhood live? On a similar note, it's been suggested that O'Brien actually still is a member of the Brotherhood, and sacrifices Winston Smith out of necessity. For that to be true, O'Brien must be a hell of an actor to come through as such a fanatic. Another speculative theory about O'Brien is that he in fact is Big Brother. In other words, the head of the inner party. He would no doubt be suitable for the position because he is clearly extraordinarily fanatical, intelligent, knowledgeable and commanding. One objection would be that the leader of the inner party hardly would spend time with outer party members and deal with trifles like brainwashing petty thought criminals. But then again, maybe he spends time in the Ministry of Love as a sort of twisted hobby. Then we come to wild theory. The theory is that Big Brother is none other than Oswald Mosley. If you're not familiar with Mosley, he was a British aristocrat, member of parliament, and most notably, leader of the British Union of Fascists. Totalitarians attract each other, so Mosley could possibly have considered joining Ingsoc, but would a fascist aristocrat be welcomed by a pseudo-socialist party? Finally, we come to a theory that is far out there. Winston Smith is in hell. This theory is perhaps not intended to be taken seriously, but I think it makes sense. Of all the non-mythological societies in fiction, Oceania might very well be the most nightmarish one. Decaying buildings, strict rationing, public hangings, black uniforms, and sterile torture chambers. Hell indeed. So, those were the fan theories. If you have an argument or a theory to add, let me know in the comments. If you found the video interesting, consider liking and subscribing. Thank you for watching.